Good morning, great morning, buenos dias. I don't know about you all, but I am personally excited to host our first official in-person Borough Board Service Cabinet meeting. As always, I am your host, Janet Peguero, and I have the privilege and honor of serving as your Deputy Bronx Borough President. Again, it's so great to see you all in person. Just a few housekeeping rules. This Borough Board and Service Cabinet meeting is being broadcasted live via BronxNet. So we will begin. Pursuant to Chapter 4, Section 85, and Chapter 69, Section 2706 of the New York City Charter, a joint meeting of the Bronx Borough Service Cabinet and Bronx Borough Board will take place this morning, Thursday, June 22nd, starting at 10:08, live in person at 198 East 161st Street, third floor conference room. And so to begin, I just want to wish you all a blessed Thursday. Happy belated Father's Day to all the fathers here and the fathers watching. Happy summer. Happy Juneteenth. Happy Caribbean Heritage, and happy Pride Month to you all. Happy healthy June. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We're going to start with roll call so that folks can identify themselves. We will start with our community boards. Community Board 1. Community Board 2.
Good morning, Madam Deputy. Rafael Acevedo, District Manager. Good morning, all.
Good morning, Rafael. Community Board 3.
Good morning, all. Etta Ritter, District Manager of Bronx Community Board 3.
Good morning, Ms. Ritter. Community Board 4.
Buenos días a todo el mundo. Robert Galmendez, Chair of Community Board 4.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Community Board 5.
Good morning, Deputy Borough President and everyone. I'm Ken Brown, District Manager of Ward 5.
Good morning, Ken. Community Board 6.
Good morning, Rafael Morris Burnett, District Manager, Board 6.
Good morning, Rafael. Community Board 7.
Good morning, everyone. Carla, District Manager.
Welcome in, Carla. Community Board 8.
Welcome and good morning, everybody. Laura Salter, Chair, Community Board 8. And Sarah Q. Rubin, the new District Manager for Community Board 8.
All right.
Welcome, Farrell. Welcome. Community Board 9.
Mohammed Majumdar, newly elected chair, Board 9.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Alonso, Assistant District Manager, CB9.
Shirley, good morning.
District
Beautiful. CB9 is here. Community Board 10. Community Board 11. Community Board 12. Wonderful, wonderful, and welcome to our new addition. We are so happy to have you. Welcome aboard. We will proceed with city council member representatives. District 8, CM Diana Ayala. District 11, Council Member Eric Dinowitz.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julio Gutierrez, constituent advocate for Community Board, Council Member Eric Dinowitz's office.
He was a community board member, so we'll forgive you for that one. District 12, Council Member Kevin Riley.
Good morning, everyone. Simone Jones, Chief of Staff for Councilmember Riley.
Good morning, Chief. District 13, Council Member Marjorie Velasquez. District 14, Council Member Pierina Sanchez. District 15, Council Member Oswald Feliz. District 16, Council Member Althea Stevens. District 17, Council Member Rafael Salamanca. District 18, Council Member Amanda Farias. And I believe a representative from CM Amanda Farias' office is on her way. We also want to extend grace to our council members who are in the thick of budget, and I know they're caught up and stated, so we thank the representatives that are here this morning. We also want to acknowledge our city agencies. We have a representative from the Comptroller's Office. Welcome. We have representatives from NYC Parks. We also have a representative from the Department of Buildings. We have our rep from the Department of Finance. And we also have representation from NYC Sanitation. We just want to acknowledge that George has joined us this morning. Thank you so much. It is so great to see you. Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. So as always, we have a jam-packed agenda this morning. First up, we have the Department of Buildings. We have Representative Ophelia Phipps, the Director of the Office of Community Engagement and Programming, who will present on the impacts of Local Law 97. Department of Buildings, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we are looking forward to this presentation. Oh. Okay, apologies. So we have Tariq and Joseph who will be presenting this morning.
Morning, everyone. Okay, so my name is Tariq Arafat. I work for the Department of Buildings. I'm a professional engineer and a certified energy manager. That's what those letters are after my name, which is relevant in the building world, and Department of Buildings certainly being a licensed professional, a PE. I've been working for the city for 7 years, but I have 20 years as a mechanical engineer experience overall. I also have a background in sustainability and public administration and data science, and I just bring that up because I wear a lot of hats at this agency, but so do a lot of us in the city government, and maybe it'll come out in the way I give my perspective on things. So I'm going to talk about Local Law 97. I'm going to talk a little bit about the why. Maybe some of you know some of the why, what it's part of, sort of bigger picture things, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about the what and when, components, parts of how it works. There's a lot of things in the law, and it'll be hard to cover it all. That's very procedural and sometimes technical. So I'm just trying to give an overview, and then if there's questions, we can get into some things. But it's my honor to talk to you about this because this is an important law, and here we go. So Climate Mobilization Act is what Local Law 97 is part of, right? It's the last bullet there, but sustainability, writ large is about for our buildings, but also New York City. It's about climate change, and these laws are the Climate Mobilization Act. Local Law 97 was passed in 2019, and we'll get into more details about that. But I just wanted to make it clear that this is part of a bigger thing, right? It started sustainability for our city really under the Bloomberg administration, carried on by Mayor de Blasio, and now Mayor Adams is continuing many of the things that were started from more than 10 years ago. So here, just at the top, this is a sustainable roofs law. It's the most ambitious in North America. It's about green roofs and solar panels on our roofs. It's making sure that we install as much as possible. The second one is energy grades for our largest buildings. So you probably noticed over the years these grades at the visible entrances of our larger buildings. This one would be one of them, right? It's a city building. It looks pretty large. I'm just going to assume. I didn't see the grade myself, but I know I always look. And then the third one is PACE, which is a type of loan program, which I won't talk about today. Accelerator, Joe, who's going to talk next, we'll get into those details. And that's something I forgot to mention, actually, structure-wise. I'm going to talk about the why, which is what we're doing now, why Local Law 97, the what and when, kind of like how and when. But Joe's going to talk about more about how to comply, like how the support will exist for our buildings, right? So he's going to talk more about that. So last but not least, after the PACE loans is, of course, Local Law 97, which is about reducing our emissions in our buildings, greenhouse gas emissions, right? That's what you see there, by 2050. So that's the goal. So sort of think of the long-term trajectory of how long or not long 2050 is from now. There's a lot of words on the slide, and I'm going to just try to touch on a few things because it just introduced certain concepts, and a lot of them are about the interconnection of things. So time frames, the top set of bullets is about 2030 benefits, impacts. The bottom set of bullets is about how the grid, which is something that operates at the state level, so we rely on the state for how the grid gets cleaner. And then on the right, your right, is this graph, this blue line. This is depicting greenhouse gas emissions of buildings from a baseline of more than 10 years ago at this point, going to a 2050. So I know I just said a lot of different things there, but just imagine we're expecting benefits for 2030, a reduction of emissions, health benefits because there's less pollution from the burning of fossil fuels locally in buildings. That's something that is a big topic, and then not our specialty at DOB, but just to make it clear about greenhouse gas emissions in our buildings. When we just think society-wide greenhouse gas emissions, it's burning of fossil fuels. The fossil fuels we burn to generate the electricity, that's more at the grid, right? But there is local production of electricity. These are fossil fuel burning plants. These are often along the water of our city. So these are the things that affect the quality of our air. But there's burning of fossil fuels in our buildings to heat our homes, right? Heat our large buildings, all of our buildings. So burning of fossil fuels emits the greenhouse gas emissions, which drives the climate change. And I just want to make that link. So this is the why of Local Law 97. Part of this Climate Mobilization Act, but is also part of why we care about greenhouse gas emissions. It's because it's connectedness to our environment. And of course, we understand what Storm Sandy did, these extreme and more frequent extreme weather events, the Canadian wildfires, and so on. And right now in Texas, there's a record heat. And these are things that are not going to let up anytime soon. So in New York City, we're doing our part and we're trying to be a leader in this. So I know I said a lot of things there, but just imagine now with this graph. So we need to reduce our emissions by 2050. That line you can see is going to the bottom, right? So it's going to zero. So by 2050, we're trying to have a net zero or carbon neutral city and building stock. So sometimes you'll hear net zero or carbon neutral. We're going to, essentially in sustainability, we use them interchangeably. And when we talk about GHG emissions, we're talking about emissions, we're talking about carbon, and we're also talking about carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent, which is what you see in that top set of bullets, 6 million tons of CO2e. And I just want to mention that because sometimes that metric will be how we calculate things. So when I say GHG emissions, I'm also meaning what you see there, tons of CO2e. So just want to make that clear because this kind of jargon you take for granted sometimes what people know or don't, and you don't want to go that way, right? We want to make sure. So anyway, largest buildings in our city are affected by Local Law 97, greater than 25,000 square feet. Now that represents about 50,000 buildings in New York City in total, but that's 50,000 buildings out of 1.1 million buildings. So relatively small number, but these are our largest buildings. That 50,000 under Local Law 97 represents 60% of our floor area in New York City. So we're going to be able to reduce a lot of emissions, the bulk of our emissions in New York, by addressing them in our buildings with Local Law 97 because of the way we use the energy, right? We're burning the fossil fuel to generate the electricity, we're burning the fossil fuel to heat our homes, and we're trying to move to the renewable energy systems. So as the grid is getting cleaner, which is the bullets from before about the state grid having goals by 2030, 2040 to make a renewable grid. As we connect more and more to our grid, including the heating of our homes and our buildings, we're going to benefit from this economies of scale of a greener city and society. So all that said, 25,000 square feet and up, 50,000 buildings, and it starts for a lot of buildings in 2024. Now there's a different compliance pathways is the term we use. I'll talk more about that next, but I just want to understand 50,000 is all of the buildings under 97, but that doesn't mean everyone's facing the limits at the same time in the same way. Because people might hear about GHG emissions limits and think, oh, they're coming up, which they are. 2024 calendar year is the first year it starts, and the reporting is, as you see there, is May 1st of every year. So May 1st, after that calendar year is over, the reporting is due. So, and then just the last two bullets to not give short shrift to our other partners in the city buildings, buildings managed by DGAS, the municipal buildings, also have their own goals, but they're not part of the limits that we'll talk a little bit about today. So when people are thinking or they're wondering what Local Law 97 is going to impact how and when our buildings, the city has their own goals, which are actually more ambitious than the overall goals of the rest of the buildings. The ones that I'm going to talk a little bit more about, the private sector buildings, if you will, and part of my very government talk on that. But then also NYCHA has their own set of goals. So portfolio-wide for the city and NYCHA for those buildings. That's part of the 50,000. So when I talk about limits, and that's coming up in 2024, it doesn't include NYCHA and city buildings, but that doesn't mean they're not on the hook for reducing emissions. They absolutely are. It's just not something DOB is going to have to oversee and enforce and regulate, without trying to sound too scary, right? And that enforcement always sounds scary. Here's a timeline. Pardon the small print, because there's a lot going on, but we're trying to just represent, the law was passed in 2019. You see that all the way on the left. All the way on the right, you see 2050, we want to get to our carbon neutrality. So we saw that with that other graph about getting that line from near the top to the bottom. And there's just essentially things happening in phases. And we call them compliance periods at DOB because they're sets of years, and that's what you see in the different colored rainbow bands. And just focus on the first one, right? Because it's the soonest. That first compliance period is 2024 to 2029, 6-year period. It's affecting certain types of buildings, over the 25,000 square feet. These are the buildings that are facing these limits, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about a little bit about how that is calculated and categorized. But I don't want to get too much into those details. But just because it's a lot at once. But just to get a sense of. That's one compliance pathway, right? That's one set of sets, like a cohort of buildings, roughly 20,000 or so. I'm kind of ballparking the number a little bit because I just don't remember exactly that group. That's the one that with the 2024 limits. There's 6,000, something like that, 5 or 6 between NYCHA and city buildings. And then there's buildings on another compliance pathway. And those are up there, and they have, we have our very building code specific jargon we use, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but there's essentially different timelines and different requirements. Doesn't mean there's not limits, it just doesn't hit right in the beginning. It hits at different time frames. So some buildings will be facing these limits in a few years, not in the 2024, but in 2 years later, and some buildings will have requirements for 2030 or even 2035. Now that's what I'm saying. I don't want to, I don't want to try to make it too much at once, but essentially different compliance paths require different timelines and different requirements. Okay, so here we go. This is there's a lot of words on the slide. I'm going to read it, even though you're not supposed to do that because we think it's important. So each property or building has a GHG limit based on the property types of the spaces within the property. Now, property types is a formal term. It's a categorization system that's from a national standard. It's something that we've utilized in our energy benchmarking program, which we've had since 2009 or 10, something like that, 12 years. So property types is from this national system, the Energy Star Portfolio Manager system. Not that I expect anyone to remember that, but it's a system that's based on energy performance and emissions. Energy performance primarily, and it's how we derive the energy grades, letter grades you see on the buildings. Anyhow, this categorization system is how the limits are assigned, meaning that the energy and emissions intensity is related to the type of building it is, the type of use. That's the real point of that. So it's not like every building is going to get the same kind of limit, because we all understand that's not really how we use our buildings. We don't use our homes the same as we use an office or a stadium or anything like a retail store. Anyhow, so second bullet, a registered architect or engineer has to do the calculations and submit this annual report that I was mentioning, the May 1st of every year. Registered design professional, RDP is the jargon we use at DOB. It's a New York State registered architect or professional engineer. I'm a professional engineer, so it's that's what we need to do. on our end, we're reviewing the other engineers and architects, but we also have to be the licensed engineers and architects. Just a point of, accountability, essentially. Just like your lawyer needs to have passed the bar, and the doctor, et cetera, right? It's just a thing. Anyhow, last but not least, a little bit about the calculation is these emissions, once is an exceedance, right, an excess emissions, then there's a subject to a potential penalty of up to $268 per metric ton of CO2e. That's why I talked about that metric, because I say GHG emissions all the time. We're trying to just use a simpler sounding word, but it's calculated in tons of CO2e. And I say penalty to $268 per metric ton because just so, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but maybe that sounds like a number, sort of a random number, but it's derived from something. And I'll talk a bit about that in a second. Actually, you know what? I'll just mention, that 268, it's meant to motivate work. But the DOB is not, and this line didn't go over well at a recent town hall, but I'm going to say it here because I think it'll be different. The DOB is not trying to fine buildings for not complying. The DOB wants to motivate the work. That's what the mayor's office has been pushing for. That's why these sustainability laws have been built on a foundation of more than a decade now. And actually, I forgot to mention, I think, what is an interesting and important fact about our buildings in New York. I mentioned the 60% of the floor area in these 50,000 buildings under Local Law 97. Well, the emissions in New York City are 2/3 from our buildings, from our energy use in buildings. We don't have as much driving as the rest of the country, so we don't have the heavy fossil fuel transportation sector like other parts of the country. I mean, we have the lowest emissions per capita of large cities in this country. Probably not a surprise if you think about it, because of even because of our public transit essentially and our density. And not to try to talk too much about like urban planning type things, but anyhow, 60% of the floor area of over 60% of our emissions means that this is the bulk of our emissions in New York are these buildings. Anyhow, so this is just an overview of a rule, right? The rule is something agencies have the ability to issue to offer guidance about requirements, more specificity about requirements for compliance, and about implementation. The DOB, like all agencies, cannot change laws. That's obviously a legislative process. But rules are issued to offer guidance to the professional sector and to the public. And this is our first rule. It's something that was stipulated in Local Law 97, that the DOB had to provide this guidance. So these are just some of the topics. It's, for the most part, a technical rule, meaning that some rules might be about fees and penalties, and those are coming. And I'll talk a bit about those future rules in a bit, but here's just an overall about these technical concepts. So calculations. I sort of said it very quickly about your tons of carbon. Well, your tons of carbon come from your electric, your natural gas, your fuel oil. It's all into units of tons of carbon. Then there's your limit of your building. Let's say it's a courthouse, right? This is a court. Well, I think this is a courthouse. Let's say it's an office. Maybe that's easier. There's a certain number for that property type, and there's a calculation. X times Y equals your limit's 100. Well, then you take your energy use of your actual building energy use, your bills essentially, and you do the RDP, the engineer or architect does the calculations. And let's say you come out to 90 tons of carbon. So 90 less than 100, you're good. And that's actually where we see buildings right now. This first compliance period, the 24 time frame that I mentioned, over 80% appear to be compliant according to our data. The data that we get annually through the benchmarking program has indicated to us we have 80% compliance for that first period. But to get to that 2050 end goal, the limits will get stricter. So as the time frames advance and the next period starts, the limits will get stricter. All that to say is, for your short-term thinking, most buildings are in good shape, and this is the idea that this law has, is to motivate the long-term thinking around your building improvements, your infrastructure, the state with the infrastructure and so on. Anyhow, I won't go into these details too much because I think they may or may not be interesting, but hopefully, it makes sense, and that's why that bottom line too, the bottom bullet, I should say, the 2050 trajectory, it's represented in those limits becoming stricter over time. So if you were to look up this rule, 10314, Rule 1 of the City of New York, there's this document. There's actually, there'll be a link at the end with on this presentation of this rule, but it's maybe not necessarily a thrilling read. It's just a lot of details. Anyhow, as I was saying, the compliance pathways, there's different timelines, different requirements. Here's an example. This is what we call Article 321 buildings. This is building code jargon. Article 321 buildings are rent-regulated affordable housing of a certain category, a certain type. And instead of meeting limits that I was describing in the periodic way of like over time, these buildings under Article 321 are buildings that will either do these prescriptive measures, these 13 things listed, and I know there's a lot to look at, and probably not a lot of it is something you'd be familiar with necessarily, or they either do these 13 measures that apply because not everything relates to the equipment in the building, or meet the 2030 limits in 2024. And hopefully that's not confusing, that's not written there. It's just another way of saying compliance pathways, as I was describing, they happen differently for different cohorts of buildings. And this is the Article 321 cohort, which is the rent-regulated and buildings. So it's just an important distinction because some people are worried about how affordability will be this law will impact affordability, and I can't really speak to that. I mean, I'm not an economist, and there's there's a lot of things in question like that, but that's something the department is working on. And also, the accelerator will talk about how they're connecting owners to incentive programs, of which there are a lot. There's the local utility, there's the state entities, so there's a lot, and I won't spoil it. Not that it's anything to spoil, but anyhow, we're doing a lot of outreach. That's what this event is about, is one example. We release, notices, guides. It's on our website. It's just exciting, like all the city government websites. Lots of stuff on there, lots of information, and there's newsletters. There, so on. You can subscribe to these things to get more. Not that that's not something that I expect people to necessarily know offhand, but a lot of everything I'm saying exists on our website. If you were to Google Local Law 97, you'll probably see our website in the first page and probably the top 1 or 2 links now. It wasn't always that way. And we're doing targeted outreach too to specific building owners as well. So that's what that last bullet is. So we're not trying to just wait for people to figure this out. We are doing everything we can to be proactive, to get them on board, to help everyone understand. All right, what's next? So I'm not going to talk too much detail about this because this is a little bit about the things that are coming. We're doing studies. We're looking at other metrics, other ways of understanding performance of buildings. So that's a deeper topic than worth getting into now, but we have study partners is the basic point. And the last bullet is about our study with NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, a state entity, and we're doing an analysis with them on RECs, renewable energy credits. And that's something, more guidance and more specifics about RECs and how they apply to Local Law 97 will be forthcoming in the rulemaking that's forthcoming. So maybe you've heard this term RECs, renewable energy credits, or maybe not, but just so you know, we're working on it, and we have a great partner in NYSERDA. So I already said this kind of sprinkled throughout. There's more rules coming. Those rules will define how penalties will be handled and how mitigating factors will be handled. So this is certainly one of the major issues, and I won't be able to talk much about that today because the rules are not finalized. It has to go through our legal department, then it's going to be put out for public review, just like the rule we talked about before. But it will be out soon, relatively soon, as we go through our process. So I will just say the mitigating factors, right? That's a probably very vague term. It will be defined, and it will relate to how penalties will get mitigated and how a good faith effort will be accounted for. So this is something in our law, good faith effort, and it will be defined. So as I was saying before, the DOB is not interested in collecting penalties and fines. It doesn't benefit a sustainable New York. It doesn't fall in line with everything we've been doing for over 10 years. So we're going to be very, open through a process, very specific process around how things can work its way out. And that's obviously vague on purpose for now. And Article 321 implementation, that's the affordable housing, rent-regulated buildings I was mentioning, and that's the 13 measures I described, and there's a lot in there. So we're going to give that guidance. And all right, here we go. Here's the end. There's our email at the top. Email us if you have any questions. That's our email at DOB on Local Law 97. The Accelerator, that's their their website, I should say. They'll show it to you 100 times too coming up. And then the rule that I was saying, the 103.14, that technical rule, that guidance, it's there. So that's it. So thank you very much. I hope that was helpful to you all. And I guess Joe is next, or
Can we take some questions before? There is, for the record, there is a separate presentation on the NYC Accelerator, but we'll pause right here to take some questions. Ken?
do you have a, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The question that I have is, for rent-regulated buildings, are there any firewalls to prevent the landlord passing this through the capital improvement and a rent increase therefore to tenants? Are there any firewalls?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm pretty sure there are. I just don't remember exactly how it works. That's why we have the lawyers on. I usually mention that is that I'm an engineer, but I work with architects, lawyers. They would know more of those details. So I'm sorry I can't give more a specific answer, but I'm pretty sure there are things in place, or that's part of the Article 321 guidance that we'll be issuing.
Oh, okay, so those regulations are probably pending?
The specificity, like the details of how requirements are and things of that nature. So, that's it. It's a good question. So if you want to know more, email us and ask it, and then we'll get you an answer. Sure.
And I just for practice, the questions that are posed here, if you can share them with us so that we can forward them over to DOB for the record. So it's important that these items are followed up on. And I believe George, really quickly for the record, I just want to acknowledge that Randy Malman is here, representative for Councilmember Amanda Farias. George.
Thank you. Good morning. I know you emphasize the fact that DOB is not looking for enforcement or to hurt landlords punitively. But I think as a district manager, one of the complaints that we receive from many constituents is that a lot of 311 complaints are made. Landlords rack up hundreds of thousands of dollars in DOB debt. I think I've been around for a little while. DOB has like $1.3 billion in outstanding violations still due to the city. That's a problem for me because every agency this year had to file a PEG because we don't have money. So what's the point of creating these I know you didn't create the legislation. That's our city council. That's the mayor's office. It goes through the process. But I think you should be more punitive. I know at the end of the day, it's about getting the landlords to do the right thing. I guess my point would be they should be doing this anyway because whenever we get new developments, these are the targets and benchmarks set for them in the buildings code now. So we're not talking about those folks. We're talking about the folks that have older buildings that will pass on the cost to their tenants because that's what the state allows for it. So I just think that, again, from someone who's taking these 311 complaints from the city and having to work with DOB on these things, something more should be done to ensure that at the end of the day, you're able to collect on these violations, because even when you level the violation, there's no measurable outcome. You guys are like a paper tiger. if the building doesn't require a permit, there's no reason for a landlord to go to you or even comply with the violation. It's only when they come to the buildings department that you can hit them over the head and say, oh, you have $32,000 worth of violations, you have to address those. And even, I'll clarify that too, not all violations that, when you come for a permit, require to be corrected. So I think that, that's something that should be looked at. Again, I understand the intention, and I think the good landlords that are out there, they're gonna do this anyway. But I just think that, especially I come from Community Board 12, some of our landlords are not the best. They don't have the intentions of the tenants in their hearts, and they're not gonna comply with this, and it's still gonna continue to be a problem. So that's my piece.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense, personally makes sense to me. When I said what I said about the DOB is not interested in dishing out fines, that's also like a talking point we're trying to put out there because of the concern about the fines. But really what the rule will define is a process that it can't just be, I'll just use my personal way of saying it, right? Because it's not a DOB thing. If there's a sort of some level of negligence or just avoidance of some sort, you can't just qualify for the mitigating factors around the good faith effort, which is the thing that I said we're working on that's not out yet. But it's one of those vehicles for when building owners have legitimate challenges, the process will be specific so that it is accounted for before penalties could be mitigated. And all that really means is that it doesn't go away, it's just a process of making sure that this law doesn't hamper the ability for those buildings to do work right now, in the near term. But it doesn't, so I understand your point, and I think we're definitely trying to make it very clear that it's not gonna, be, what you're saying. It's a fine, I guess I'll say for myself, it seems like a fine line to me of like what can happen, or you don't always know the sort of results at the ground level. But I think that's why we have our rulemaking that we can modify in those successive periods, or even before the periods are over, the compliance period, to make sure that there's not, something else going on that we don't intend. So, yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Robert, and then I have Mohammed and Simone.
Thank you. If you could explain simply, you being a mechanical engineer, at the beginning you mentioned why the grades? What are they for? I'll be honest, I've never understood that,
Yeah, sure. No, that's a good question, and we get those all as well. It's part of the run-up to the run-up. When I say that, I mean like the culmination of, let's say, Local Law 97, meaning the way it was described to me, and I wasn't part of the DOB for the genesis of some of the laws from more than 10 years ago. They thought of, supposedly, legislators thought of Local Law 97 first. Like, this is where we need to go. We need to put emissions limits on our buildings because our buildings are where our emissions are. Emissions cause climate change because it amplifies the greenhouse gas effect, makes the weather, crazy, right? Et cetera, right? Like that whole, that whole thing. So the grades are part of, we're getting the energy data every year, this annual benchmarking. And that is part of it, that national program, that EPA Energy Star program I was describing. So those grades are derived from their scoring system. So it was something that was already available. And people see the letter grades for restaurants around the Department of Health grades. I believe it's the Department of Health, right? So it's like, I don't know about you, but you see that grade and you might make a decision based on that grade. And that's what we want with the energy grades. So the thing that is also part of the energy grade, though, and maybe this is part of what you're wondering, is it's energy, right? It's an energy grade. And I know it's not always clear the difference between energy and emissions. It's very correlated, but it's not exactly the same. Meaning the way we use energy in society will derive different amount of emissions. So some fuels, if you will, are dirtier, right? They have more emissions. when you burn coal for electricity at the power plants, it's dirtier than burning natural gas. So even though you get like X energy units, 100 units of energy, well, the coal is twice the emissions than the natural gas. So it's worse for our environment. So that's just an example just to try to put it to like the building level, which I know it's a little bit different. It's different, but in most of our homes, we're burning gas or oil to heat our homes, to make the hot water or the steam. Right, it goes in our radiators, hot water for our faucets, the showers, and so on. We're burning fossil fuel to heat that water or steam, and then it goes around. That's fossil fuel derived. That's the energy. That's the stuff that goes into the energy annual benchmarking that derives the grade. It's that energy, that national system has a statistical methodology that derives that. So it's something that we could compare buildings here versus buildings in the rest of the country. So that's why it was used. It was sort of like, I'll say it the way I think of it, it's sort of out of the box ready, that energy program of the national level to make it the grade. But it doesn't correlate 100% directly to your local law 97 situation, if that makes sense. So you can get an A grade, but you might have to do work in your building because it's just not that one-for-one energy and emissions. Hopefully, is that helpful? Okay, great. Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Thank you. So my question is referring to the first bullet point on local law 97. You mentioned that certain buildings need to be covered by the green, but which certain buildings? Can you just explain?
You're talking about the size of buildings? Yeah, I think, let me just put it up just to make sure. Was it this, do you think? Very first, oh,
Very first one.
very first one, this one.
Very first one. The beginning.
This would be the slide, after the title is this. There's this one.
Yes.
Maybe
But
that.
greenhouse gas. No, not this one. You weren't supposed to cover by the green.
Well, maybe could you just maybe describe it? Could you just say it again, please? Your
Yeah,
question?
In the local law 97, starting from beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that certain building need to be covered by the green grasses. Something.
Oh, yeah, that is this one.
Yeah.
Local law 92 and 94, part of the Climate Mobilization Act. This is about green roofs. Or that's how the sort of green roofs or solar PV. So green roofs being like garden, like almost like the greenery on a roof, or solar PV, solar panels, right? Solar PV is the solar panels for the renewable energy.
The question is certain building, but which building? What size of the building?
Oh, I see. I forget offhand. It is also larger buildings, and new construction has to go through this evaluation. I don't deal with this like every day, so sometimes I apologize. Sometimes I forget. It's a requirement at the new stages of buildings and when major renovations happen, and it's about feasibility of these things, green roofs or solar PV, and also about a tax abatement program. So the buildings that decide to take on a project will get a tax abatement, and there's a whole formula, and I couldn't remember it all off the top of my head, but it exists. So if you have some specific questions, then please email, or we'll try to maybe address something more specific if that is helpful. Sure.
This also on the DEP?
I think it, yeah.
Point system with green roofs.
Yeah, yes, you're correct. As I recall, it's DEP and Department of Finance because of the tax abatement portion. And yeah, there's certain things that have to be met. So it's a mix of building code and the DEP and then the the Department of Finance with tax abatement. So.
That Anthony Jordan has joined us, District Manager for CB1. Welcome. And we have two more questions, and unfortunately, we have to wrap. Simone?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I think I'm not trying to ask you a trick question, so I'll probably just turn it to a recommendation. Right here in the Bronx, specifically in District 12, we have Co-op City, which is the largest NORC in the nation. We're talking about 35 high-rise buildings, 7 townhome clusters, I think that's 15,000 plus residential units. They also have their own power plant. With fossil fuel, you're talking about gas stoves in every apartment, right? So I would ask that we can definitely have a follow-up conversation if you guys have time, but I don't really see how they fit into the plan and how we can support them and making sure that they're on track, right? And not gonna get fined as a result of that, because of course that will trickle down to the shareholders. But I know you guys mentioned that you guys are doing studies and things of that nature, and our request would be that you guys specifically look at Co-op City, right? Because they're very unique in their living, and so I really don't see the support for those shareholders or that specific cluster in local law 97. So if that's something like we can think through and talk about, like, we would greatly appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Simone, for that question. That's a concern that the Bronx Borough President's Office has, and we know that Mayor Adams has said that he's not going to let the co-ops fail, but we haven't seen any real rollout of any initiative to support co-ops, and that's really, really important for the reasons that Simone outlined.
Yeah, thank you, both of you. To me, it makes sense, and I'd say there are many things we're studying. I'm pretty sure that we have property, large properties, especially like Co-op City, in mind. We've had some discussions with other large property, management companies that are, not necessarily as large as Co-op City, but also very large. Also generating, they're generating their own electricity by burning the fossil fuels. We understand I'm speaking the way I guess I'm thinking of it for myself. We know it's a different situation, and we've done more like one-on-one with those entities. So I think we would be able to accommodate that. The leadership that I work for, our deputy commissioner, she deals with a lot of the entities that probably you deal with or knows them, and would be able to connect things and connect the dots better than I could in this moment. But we've talked. But I'll just say one other quick point. We've talked to Con Ed, for example, about the challenges or the ability. Well, I shouldn't say challenges, but it's rather what it'll take to connect large properties like Co-op City to the electric grid, and they're very well aware of it, and that's part of one of our partners in figuring this out. So I think this is all something we are working on, but the more specific outreach in co-ops, I think that's something, there'll be more of. I just myself can't really, I think there's going to be more, and I just don't know what it is myself.
We will definitely follow up with DOB and take you up on that offer. Rafael, and final question on this item.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. And thank you, Tarek, for the presentation. Something my colleague Ken mentioned earlier, we just had in Board 2, City Planning present a text amendment regarding environmental feasibility, and a condition, it passed with a condition that capital expenses to the landlord won't be rolled over into rent. And that's something that was a major concern in my district. You did mention there's 1.1 million buildings, and this is only 50,000, so that's roughly like 5% of the total number of buildings. My question, can we get a breakdown of those 50, who identified those 50,000? So we at least know per respective districts which building this first wave is gonna take effect in.
Yeah, thank you, Rafael.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I didn't mention this during the presentation, but on our website, there's what's called a covered buildings list, a CBL, right? We love acronyms. CBL for Local Law 97, covered buildings list, and it will have the identifying information, the building block lot of the property, which properties can have one building or multiple buildings. That jargon is just a specific, terminology just to make it clear that it's by BBL, building block lot, which is property, but then there's buildings on, some properties have multiple buildings. All of that is on this CBL. So to your question, if you were to look at the CBL, it's Excel or PDF file, you could download it, and you could, let's say the Excel, you could sort it by borough, you could search for addresses, and it's a spreadsheet, so you would be able to see. this. And not to put this work on you, you know, because there are some, you know, like here, download the spreadsheet and figure it out. But there's also like more interactive dashboard type resources. We have a map on our website that also has this information. You know, but it's more visual, and you click into it, and then you know, we love maps in the city, right? Just click around and look at stuff. But it'll just give you like, you're on the list. So yeah, that exists. If you're thinking about it, so if you're 25,000 square feet or up, you're going to be on the list. As far as we know, we're relying on a partner agency, Department of Finance. They are also our partner on the benchmarking law, so where we would also have a CBL. So this is very much the same process we've been doing now for over 10 years. And your Bronx buildings will be there. If you have something more specific you're thinking of, or maybe you need more, you know, you're looking for something more, you know, please email us and maybe, you know, get into some other details. I think part of what the accelerator will talk about is how specific owners, you know, we will want to do the very hands-on, one-on-one support. So meaning, you know, that's part of this information campaign. It is the point of it, is that we want owners to be comfortable with connecting to the technical support they need and the incentive support, just to know what's out there, right? There's a whole lot of things to sort of maybe understand for the first time or in a different way. Someone, you know, we were talking about routine maintenance. I'll make this point quick. We know that routine maintenance is important for buildings, right? That's like a very obvious thing to say. This law is also meant to drive the consideration of how emissions plays into these types of upgrades and improvements, and just sort of switch out. The boiler is old, and then you could just put another boiler in, kind of like the new version of the same thing, but that wouldn't prepare us in that building for the future, and clean the air and so on. So all this to say is specific situations, of course, vary. That's why looking at the CBL, the covered buildings list, and maybe recognizing what challenges are localized, right, or specific to that situation. I don't know if that is helpful, but I'm just pointing out, like, I talk a lot of big picture stuff because that's, kind of the way to start, but, you want to look at these buildings yourselves, or, you look at if your own building perhaps is on this list.
Okay, so the CBL, how, will it show the status? Like, will it give us a current status if they're in compliance once the local law kicks in?
No, but the accelerator has a web page on their site, and Joe will talk about that, and that's why we want you to connect with them, for example, because we want that specific support. So then someone could walk through, let's say the property manager, the building owner, so on, the co-op, leadership, and say, here's what's going on for your building based on the information we have, or maybe there's some information exchange. I mean, Joe could talk more about that, but absolutely. So that is available, that kind of understanding and support. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Tarek, and I just hope that through these questions you see how passionate and intentional we are about ensuring that there is support, not just for some, but for all of the constituents that we represent. Before we move into the second portion of the presentation, I just been warned that our Madam Borough President is here, and she just wants to share greetings. So we're just gonna allow her to step on in. As mentioned, we've been joined by our Madam Borough President, Vanessa O. Gibson, who's here to share greetings.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. Fresh off of graduation this morning, but wanted to take this opportunity. This is our first meeting in person since we went to remote. So first and foremost, thank you, everyone. Welcome. Always grateful to see everyone in person. We've had many conversations remote over these past several months, and as we resume in-person meetings, certainly Borough Board as well as your community boards wanted to say thank you for your incredible service. Thank you for all that you have done. This has been an exciting yet challenging year. We've had many conversations with our district managers, our chairpersons, as well as our council members and their representatives. And I'm always grateful that while I am physically not here, you know that we are in certainly the hands of our Deputy Borough President. So I want to say to
Our Deputy Borough President, Janet Peguero, thank you for always leading our borough boards. Our Senior Advisor, Tom Lucania, who many of you know, and certainly our new President and Chair of the Community Boards Unit in our office, Kara Gannon, who used to sit in those seats not too long ago. But we are excited. The last time I was here, I believe, was earlier in maybe February, and we presented all of you with our strategic policy plan, which is our blueprint for this great borough, to look at the borough as a borough of opportunities, to expand on global destination, and really affirming our commitment to making this borough the greatest place to live, work, and raise our families. We are extremely intentional in this work. We are looking at creative and innovative approaches, the public-private partnerships, all of the investments that we know will make an impact, creating that pathway to stability, pathway to homeownership, and pathway to economic prosperity. Over the last several months, we've been working closely with our colleagues in Albany, in the State Senate, the State Assembly, as well as Governor Kathy Hochul on the adoption of the state budget that happened in April. And we do know that the State Assembly just finished their legislative session late last night, and there were a lot of items that were on the table, some that were off. But overall, the budget for the state of New York gives New York City a significant amount of funding in education, in higher education, and so many areas like universal child care that we all care about. And now at the local level, we are waiting for the City Council and Speaker Adrian Adams under the administration to work on a budget for the City of New York, and that's where our budget comes in. So we're very excited because we are looking forward to making announcements over the next several weeks of a number of allocations that we have made in our budget for FY24. And I will say that our priority has and always will be education. Last year, in the adopted budget, we designated almost $15 million in education projects, capital projects, technology improvements, anything from smart boards to Chrome notebooks, new laptops. We are very supportive of hydroponic gardens because we want our children to have sufficient science labs. We want them to have the access and opportunity that many of us did not have ourselves. This year, I'm proud to say that we not only met that $15 million goal target, but we are exceeding it, and we're close to $20 million in this year. We've paid particular attention to District 75, and those are our students with special needs that may be on the spectrum, that may be nonverbal, and they are the students that need the most, but have the greatest potential. D75 has gotten a great deal of attention in this budget. I can't wait to make the announcements as soon as the budget is adopted. And then we've also paid particular attention to tech equity and addressing the digital divide, because we truly know many families were disconnected during COVID, and we want to make sure that not only are our families connected, our children and our older adults. So we've been working closely with DFTA and the administration on programs for our older adults at senior centers, our NORCs, a lot of programs that are doing amazing things. But we know that in this financial climate, there are potential programs that will face cuts, particularly in human services. Our human service workers that work in our non-for-profits, that were on the ground during the pandemic, that need pay parity and pay equity. And many of them in the social service industry are predominantly women and women of color, the social workers, the guidance counselors, the clinicians. We need to make sure that they are paid equitably and fairly in this industry. So a lot of things are on the table in these next couple of days that we get towards adoption, but we are extremely supportive of a lot of the initiatives that have been championed and carried by the New York City Council. Last night, you all know, RGB, Rent Guidelines Board, did vote, I believe it was 5-4, in support of increases for 1- and 2-year leases for 1 million rent-stabilized tenants across the city of New York. And that's deeply personal for many of us, because the overwhelming level of evictions that we're seeing in the city of New York, a little over 200,000 with the expiration of the state's moratorium, as well as just the overwhelming nature of housing court in itself. Most of those 200,000 cases are in northern Manhattan, parts of central Brooklyn, and the Bronx. And we obviously know many of the community boards that you represent are also the clients that are facing eviction. I am super supportive of the right to counsel law that is now law and needs to be implemented fully and fully funded, and working with the city council to make sure that is a reality. Because we know that there are households that will be able to absorb an increase, but there are many that will not. And even if it's a modest 2.7%, it's 3%, that's still more money that families have to identify that they don't have today. They're already spending more than 30% of their income towards rent. They're rent burdened, and many of them are facing the brunt of an unaffordable city. And our answer to that, right to counsel, fully implemented, fully funded, but also deeply affordable housing. We can never build enough housing to meet the demand, so we know we have to protect the stock that we have today. It goes hand in hand. And so obviously now that the decision has been made, we are feeling the impact and will feel the impact. And we also know there are many small landlords that are also facing the brunt of a city that's unaffordable. The property taxes, the water bill, the maintenance, everything that landlords have to go through to maintain their buildings. We know that the smaller landlords in the industry are also facing burdens as well, and we have to address that. It can be a balanced approach to support tenants and landlords as well. And other than that, we have upcoming events that we are getting ready for this summer, although I know I will see all of you this summer anyway, but did want to just express my appreciation and certainly my gratitude, particularly the last several months when we have had to have conversations on the numbers of migrant families and asylum seekers that we have seen in our city. Well over 60,000 families and single adults have come into our city since last April, and many of them are in commercial hotels in our borough. They're in SROs, they're in transitional housing, they're in HPD housing, they're in a number of different housing settings, and that has caused a lot of challenges for us when we are faced with fires. And that's another topic for another day, but certainly important when you talk about fire education and fire safety. The fires that we've had just in the past 2 weeks alone have displaced dozens of families, and we are now still working with those families to identify permanent housing or a return to their original housing. But because of the limited capacity of Red Cross's footprint in our borough, many of those families that you all represent are not housed in the Bronx today. And that is a problem for me and a problem for all of us. So our answer is to identify new hotels, new partners that we can contract with, because we know that unfortunately the one thing that we consistently face in this borough and this city are fires. Some of them are residential, some are commercial, some are more serious and severe than others. The loss of life, the trauma of being displaced is a real one, and I know all of you have felt that at all of your community boards. So I want to say thank you for your empathy, for your sympathy, for always racing into action and making sure that we are always working together. Because when we join together and we partner, we really demonstrate the strength that this borough deserves and show the residents that we represent that we are here to help them in the good times and in the bad times. Some of those stories will never make it to the news, but we know those stories. We know the stories of the young lady whose prom dress was in her apartment and she wasn't able to get it, and we were able to give her an amazing prom. Or the young man who also, his suit was in his apartment and he got an amazing prom. Or those that needed, just financial support. It was us. It was all of you, the council members, that reached out and helped those families. So for that, I am always grateful. And again, as I wrap up, I just want to say thank you for your support. I welcome our new district manager of Community Board 7. Welcome, Carla, and congratulations on your new position. We look forward to working with you. And to everyone here, we are partners. We are allies in this work. We are here to support you, to work with you, and we know that there are tough times that lie ahead. But one thing I can be assured is that by us working together, there is nothing impossible for us. In our first week serving as your borough president and your deputy, we faced one of the most horrific fires that this city has ever saw. 17 neighbors that perished in a fire. And I realized in that moment that God was using us, and he gave us the toughest battle because he saw the soldiers that we are. And he saw that under the worst of circumstances, the people of this borough will always step up. And that's exactly what we did for Twin Parks, for Longwood when we had a building explosion, and every other tragedy that we have faced, we have been able to stand up. For that, I am always grateful. The partnerships we have with our city agencies, with all of our CBOs, goes a long way. So again, I thank you. I look forward to working with all of you at our various events that we have. So many different things that we celebrate, but one thing all of you know is that everything we do, we include our young people. They are always at the table. We always lift them up. MBK, MSK, so many initiatives that we are not only spearheading, but we are putting forth are really, really demonstrating that this is a new administration, and we want to make sure that everyone is included and has their seat at the table. So, oh, yes, absolutely. Okay, we have other new people. Okay. I also want to recognize our new district manager of Community Board 8, Farah. Welcome. Thank you, Farah Rubin, for being here. Congratulations to you. And I think we've met before. Looking forward to working with you. And really, everyone, thank you on behalf of our team and we are grateful for your partnership, and we look forward to our continued work. Thank you.
Thank you. It is always a treat when we are greeted by our very own Borough President. Thank you so much. And up next, we have the second portion of the DOB presentation by Joseph Stalupi, NYC Accelerator. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to go through all this. And it's truly inspiring to be in a room with everyone so passionate. So amazing stuff.
That's the Bronx.
Yeah. My Grammy grew up near Morris Park Avenue, so special place in my heart. But anyways, my name is Joseph Stalupi. Good morning, everyone. I work with the New York City Accelerator Program, which is a city initiative offered through the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. And our services include free consultation to building stakeholders who are looking to pursue renewable and efficient energy upgrades within their building. So I'll just recap essentially the context of why we're here. Nearly 70% of NYC's emissions come from buildings. These buildings are here to stay, and we need to be carbon neutral by 2050 if we are going to, create a healthy and sustainable future for these generations to come and in the present. So this is done by building decarbonization policies, as we just reviewed with Local Law 97, driving all of this. And I do want to note, just as a proud New Yorker who grew up in Westchester, this Local Law 97 is by far the most ambitious climate policy on a global scale. So New York City is truly piloting and spearheading our ability to combat a global climate crisis. So it is a real opportunity here to show that New York grit and solve this problem. So in support to that, there is free technical assistance, which I'll go through, and this is supporting the economic development, workforce development, and equitable transition away from fossil fuels so that no one gets left behind. So how can the New York City Accelerator help? I'll provide some context in terms of what my role is. I'm an account manager, so there's about 30 other individuals as my colleagues who are these account managers, and we provide tailored one-on-one guidance to building stakeholders, one building at a time. I've been on hundreds of these types of calls, and it has never gone the same. Every building is different. Every building has different energy improvement needs. Every building was built in a different year with different quirks, different tenant behaviors. So it is really going to take a one-on-one, meaningful approach to this. It's not a cookie cutter kind of approach. So I just really want to emphasize that, this work is unique to that specific BBL or site. We deliver expert guidance to determine the requirements and help meet local law energy reduction goals. We connect buildings with our service providers. So the work's got to be done at some point. So we have a vetted list of energy efficiency auditors and contractors who complete this work, and we are always ensuring that these participants are utilizing state and utility incentive programs to alleviate the project costs as much as possible. And we also will utilize free or low-cost measures to get the ball rolling. And for these larger, more comprehensive projects, such as a whole building window replacement or building envelope, or you see in the bodegas all the time those little those units on the wall. That's electrified heating and cooling. It's the most optimized way to heat and cool your space to date, and it is electrified. Over the next several years, the city and the state are ramping up efforts to green the grid so that it is all coming from renewable energy. So, we're flying the plane while we're also trying to build it. So literally every building counts. And as I mentioned, we also utilize an in-house financing specialist so that you can, if any building needs that extra support after the utility or state incentives, bring it down, there are several options available. I'll get more into that in a moment. But who is eligible? So we just went through Local Law 97. That's specific to buildings over 25,000 square feet. I do want to be clear that the New York City Accelerator, I should say, will support any privately owned New York City building greater than 5,000 square feet. So these are just the individuals who want to improve their occupant satisfaction, and they want to lower their utility and maintenance costs. And these are the good faith, good-hearted individuals who are doing this for moral reasons, etc. So, how this works, I do have a card here that I will leave for you to ask me any questions that you need. But a building stakeholder will get connected to someone like myself or one of my colleagues, and we will go through the individual needs of that building. And it is absolutely free. So you'll learn about the program, we'll assess what work might need to be done. Maybe we'll need to do pursue an audit so that we can understand the building, the actual building needs, and we can use that as a roadmap. We'll decide on which makes sense, as well as the timeline and the priority. We'll then do our best to connect with these state and utility incentive programs, work with financing, work with lenders and loans, and we'll implement these measures. And you stay in touch. We can, continue to, keep the ball rolling. So if anyone wants just to take a quick picture or anything, I'm not sure if this slide deck will be available, but I can certainly make it so if anyone would like to reach out.
Yeah, I just want to add that all of the slides and presentations will be shared after the Borough Board meeting. Thank you.
Perfect. And some of the resources that you can find on our website include, a little bit, less complicated guidance on the local laws, different technical primers which explain what's out there in the city, case studies in case anyone would like to see, what was done in my neighbor's building. It's not going to be the neighbor, but there could be a building that has a similar typology to yours. You might want to see what they went through and how they benefited. It's always good to have a case study. We also have a number of online tools. I believe a gentleman earlier asked about the emissions calculator. I'll get more into that later in this deck, but if anyone has a little pen and paper, there is a wonderful LL97 greenhouse gas emissions calculator available through an organization known as the Building Energy Exchange. You can just literally Google Building Energy Exchange LL97 calculator, and it provides you with what your fines are estimated at for the 2024 to 2029 period, as well as the periods following, starting in 2030, which will become more stringent because the trajectory is carbon neutrality by 2050. We use a similar calculator. It's called the Building Energy Snapshot, but just, personally, I enjoy utilizing the Building Energy Exchange's platform when having these types of conversations with building stakeholders. I'm kind of just going to skip, right through this because the gist of this is that, we use public data to understand where the building's at. So we have extracted benchmarking data, and we get an understanding of when the last time you did an LL87 audit was. For buildings over 50,000 square feet, you have to do an audit every 10 years and address any building deficiencies. So these are all just resources that account managers will compile for the building stakeholder and work with them to assess what needs to be done. So now let's start talking a little bit more specifically in terms of what this could look like. So as you can see, hopefully, on this little table, there are different penalty periods. It will be starting in 2024, so all the energy that's used throughout 2024 will be covered in this first LL97 penalty period. You can see that the bottom two do not have anything. They are within their compliance threshold. I believe about only a quarter of buildings are currently subject to the 2024 period, but nearly 70% are in compliance or are not in compliance for the 2030 period. So if any building has something coming up in the immediate, there are some low-hanging fruit measures that might be able to get them underneath that threshold. But for buildings that are looking more so long-term, it's great to work with the New York City Accelerator Program to develop a long-term strategy to address energy reduction in that building. So just to get the brain rolling, you can consider the common area lighting. Is it LED? Are there controls? What's going on with the heating system? Are you utilizing oil, natural gas? Is your building capable of converting to electrification? These are some questions that we'll ask. What's going on with the cooling system? Are there window units? That's typically not the best way to go. Ventilation, are you utilizing a 0 to 100 approach when they flick the switch? Is it going off or is it optimized? Domestic hot water, building envelopes, elevators if the building is that typology. And what's happening with the roof? There's a lot that you can do on that as well. So for buildings that are already close to their targets, invest in maintenance. Install there's free opportunities available through these utility incentive programs where tenants can receive low flow aerator devices for faucets and shower heads. Tenants can receive LED bulbs. There's air sealing, there's low cost air sealing. There's a number of different low hanging fruit opportunities that I will come off with first so that we can get the ball rolling in tandem with developing a more long-term plan. For buildings that are significantly underperforming, this is where we'll start to talk about, is there insulation in the roof, and how leaky is this building? Do we need to replace the heating system at large? What's going on with all the different mechanical components of your building? And for the worst performing buildings, we're going to have to hit everything. But these are going to be extremely large, typically commercial type buildings. I would say that the majority, just have to do some of these low-hanging fruit measures. So for the, building energy snapshot, you can just actually type in your address and we'll give you some of the information that I've outlined, including what you're up against in terms of these fines, what the benchmarking is, et cetera. But I did mention before, if anyone wants just to note, the building energy exchange calculator is, I think, just a more dynamic tool that is better. You can use as many resources as you can get your hands on. The important thing to note about the New York City Accelerator Program, we do not implement any of the work. We're not coming to the site to assess. We're not conducting a full comprehensive audit. We're not, switching the bulbs. We're not, going through the plumbing. We are purely a consulting agency. So we are there to tailor advice and essentially act as just two extra hands on a coordination route for these building stakeholders to demystify the path that we have to take, to connect the dots between what's out there in terms of state and utility funding and what the building needs to pursue in terms of energy improvements. And one great thing that we provide through Accelerator is a vetted list of service providers. That's what they are known as. So these are going to be the energy consulting firms or the installers out there. You see their vans all the time on the city. But we work with them closely, and they understand this realm. You know, I understand that the learning curve once I get into all this engineering lingo is definitely not for everyone. But you know, we're here to, as I mentioned, demystify and just simplify this process, because we're here to help you. So take us up on these resources. We also offer a learning center. There's several trainings for sustainable building operations, so like supers or co-op board members that are interested in learning more in terms of how to optimize their building. We offer a lot of different trainings. We have a lot of industry events and webinars, etc. And as I mentioned, we do have a lot of different connections to training partners: Building Energy Exchange, Urban Green Council, Passive House Network, Building Performance Lab. These are all resources that, sign up for their newsletter, just get an understanding of what's happening. And I'll briefly go through financing support. I mentioned that we do have an in-house financing specialist that will tailor the individual's building needs to relevant financing opportunities. So, there's a lot that's going to go into this in terms of what the financial situation is, where the building's at in terms of their mortgage cycle, et cetera. So this is where it's really going to get, tailored one-on-one specific. So this is all free. And we can identify a number of different programs. One that was passed through the Climate Mobilization Act through Local Law 96 was PACE financing, or Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing. It might be, it might not be right for your building, but there's others available. And why this is beneficial: it minimizes or eliminates the need for upfront funding, which at the beginning of this presentation I mentioned we're trying to get that number down to as little as possible through leveraging these state and utility incentive programs. You can address the immediate and long-term LL97 requirements, and you might not need financing for every single project on the list. You might want to. This is why we're helpful in prioritizing and creating that roadmap to go, okay, we have done the low-hanging fruit, now let's get a little bit more comprehensive with it. And what is extremely important to note is reducing the financing costs it's going to eventually lead to cash flow. Once we've diminished that number, and we have potential, if the building is relevant for financing over a long-term period with, hopefully, minimal interest rates, you're going to start to save money on these utility costs or these maintenance costs because you're utilizing state-of-the-art, up-to-date, and innovative energy technology. So, it might be, you might get hit with, in a short term, that's a high number, but if you're thinking about it long term and thinking about the simple payback of these projects and the return on investment that you'll be getting to acquire, it's not going to be as hard of a decision. I'm going to skip this video because it never works. And this is for, it's called the New York City Carbon Challenge, which is a voluntary leadership initiative and public-private partnership for leaders in the private, institutional, and nonprofit sectors. So this is for if anyone of your constituents are truly committed to optimizing their building performance metrics. It is a recognition program, and it could be beneficial to join in. But other than that, as I mentioned, it's all very building specific. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy to stay a little. I do have to run to another event right after this. I will leave my card with the general New York City Accelerator information, but also my personal. So if anyone wants to reach out to me directly, I'll provide this to Madam Deputy President and Madam President. Other than that, I thank you all for your time, and looking forward to hopefully working with you more.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and unfortunately, we are tight on time, and we have two more presenters on our agenda. But Joseph, one of the things that I do want to point out, and we'll get in touch with the NYC Accelerator, we would love to see days of action from the DOB team, whether it's working with the community boards to kind of highlight which areas are in dire need of this support. We would love to have the Accelerator team conduct days of action
Yeah,
to spread the
absolutely.
word.
And, just one final point, just, looping back to one of the original questions, like something that the accelerator could support with is sifting through those covered buildings list and understanding, as long as I can have like zip codes of areas and whatnot, we could identify which buildings are, coming up for a local law 97, and we can address those first. I'm happy to, just an extra set of hands. So I will give this to you.
Thank you so
And,
much.
yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Up next, we have the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. And again, we are tight on time, so we appreciate our presenters consolidating their presentations. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you all for inviting us to come here and speak at this meeting. I'm Julie Wertheimer-Meyer. I'm the Senior Research Analyst on the Research and Evaluation team at the Mayor's Office to End. I'm on the Research and Evaluation team at the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. I'm joined by my colleague, who I will allow to introduce herself really quick.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm Karen Nessner, and I'm a research analyst. I work with Julie at the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence.
And then we also have our research analyst fellow, Maritza, over there. And so today we are here to present on some data that we've put together looking at racial and gender disparities in domestic violence victimization rates across New York City neighborhoods, and because we're here with a particular focus on the Bronx. I want to start off right away by acknowledging some of the underlying root causes of domestic violence, which stem from a culture of oppression and privilege. The racial and gender disparities in the data that we will be talking about today are largely a function of historic inequities and structural oppression, including the interaction of systemic racism and sexism that disproportionately impact women of color. So it's necessary to keep this social context of the data in mind, as usual measures of domestic violence risk factors do not consider these historic inequities in access to resources, gender-based attitudes about power and control, and a history of policies and structures that deny resources to people of color. And then notably, the data in this and similar reports only captures the existence of violence and the disparities and not its root causes. So truly understanding and eliminating these domestic violence disparities in New York City and in the Bronx requires really digging deep and understanding and responding to those root causes, including the structural oppression and sort of all of the isms that make it up. So the data that we used for this report came from the NYPD's domestic violence felony assault offense data from 2020 and 2021 domestic violence incident reports, or DIRs. A DIR is a New York State form that the NYPD officers are expected to complete every time they respond to a domestic violence incident, regardless of whether an arrest is made. So the responding officer completes the DIR form, which includes the location and date of the incident, the relationship between the suspect and the victim, and the demographics of both the victim and the suspect. For our population data, we took it from the 2020 Census Bureau's American Community Survey sample, because this census provides demographic data for the population of New York City, but specifically broken down by age, race, and ethnicity and gender for the population of all 59 community districts in New York City. So we used the DIR data and the New York Census data to calculate domestic violence victimization rates, which measure the extent to which a specific population is at risk of becoming the victim of a specific type of crime. So we calculate victimization rates by dividing the number of victimizations that occur during a specified time. So this might have been, for example, the number of domestic violence felony assaults that occurred against white men in the Bronx in 2020 and 2021, and then divided that by the population at risk for victimization. So the number of white men residing in the Bronx during that time period. To make the numbers a little bit more understandable and applicable, we multiplied the estimate by 10,000 so that now we can estimate the number of residents out of 10,000 who might have experienced victimization. So a victimization rate of 25, for example, would indicate a population in which 25 out of 10,000 individuals are likely to experience a domestic violence incident. And so calculating victimization rates in this way allows us to compare victimizations and domestic violence incidences over time and between population subgroups. Importantly, the data reflected in this report are based solely off of these incidents reported by and to the NYPD. And it's important to remember that national studies indicate that only about half of domestic violence incidents are reported to law enforcement. So there are a number of reasons why people might not report domestic violence to law enforcement, including socioeconomic factors like education and income, a fear or mistrust of law enforcement, fear of getting the offender involved in the criminal justice system, a belief that law enforcement will not or cannot help in the matter, the belief that the offense was too personal or too trivial to report, and other factors related to the intersectionality of race and gender. And so intersectionality concerns related to race, gender, and class are important considerations in understanding who is and is not potentially reporting domestic violence to the police. Women and people of color, and especially women of color, experience elevated risks of domestic violence, as well as increased barriers to accessing services. So again, those are sort of the manifestation of those root causes of violence coming to fruition and making it so that some populations are simultaneously more at risk of harm and also less able to access the resources that might help them prevent or avoid the harm. So in New York City, we define domestic violence as including two types: intimate partner violence and other family violence. And so for this presentation, I'm first going to start with the data on intimate partner violence, and then I'll quickly cover the family violence data, because as you'll see, the patterns are a little bit different for each type, so it is important to distinguish the kinds of domestic violence that we are talking about. So intimate partner violence is violence between individuals who are currently or formerly married, divorced, dating, in some kind of relationship, or who have a child in common. So this graph shows the rates of intimate partner violence, felony assault, victimization across New York City, broken down by race and gender. So you can see over here that on the far, what is that? I guess you're right. That New York City has an overall victimization rate of 7.9, meaning that about 8 out of 10,000 residents in New York City are at risk of IPV felony assault victimization. And then as you can see farther on the left, the victimization rate is highest for Black women at about 22 incidents per 10,000 residents. So that's nearly 3 times higher than the overall risk for the average New York City resident. We then compared the actual number of intimate partner violence, felony assault incidents experienced by New York City residents to the number of incidents that would be expected if the data reflected the New York City population demographics. So on this graph, the blue bars indicate the actual number of incidents that occurred, and the gray bars indicate the number of incidents that would be expected if sort of domestic violence, felony assault had occurred in proportion to the New York City demographics. And so this graph shows that a disproportionately high number of IPV felony assault victims were Black, In fact, Black residents account for 22% of the New York City population, but 46% of IPV felony assault victims. In contrast, a disproportionately low number of IPV felony assault victims were white or Asian and Pacific Islander. So then we broke down the victimization rates by borough, and you can see that the IPV felony assault rate is highest in the Bronx. It's nearly twice as high as the overall victimization rate in the city more generally. And you sort of see the same pattern as in New York City when you look at the victimization rates broken down by race and gender in the Bronx. The rate is still highest for Black women. And then you still get the same sort of racial disparities that you saw in New York City overall, where a disproportionately high percentage of victims are Black compared to the general population of New York City. We also calculated the victimization rates generally for each of the Bronx community districts. And you can see that Bronx districts 3 and 6 have the highest victimization rates in the Bronx, about 20 incidents per 10,000 residents of those districts, followed closely by Bronx Community District 4. And again, you see some of the same disparities if we break down the data looking more specifically into Bronx Community Districts 3 and 6. For instance, Black women, again, report the highest victimization rates of any of the demographic populations. And again, you see the same sort of disparities in proportion of the incidents. And so the reason that I'm choosing to highlight Bronx Community Districts 3 and 6 is because we are looking to do some community outreach and work around domestic violence and domestic violence homicide in those districts. And so Kara is going to talk a little bit about some of the domestic violence homicide data that we have, as well as some of the outreach that we're hoping to do in those communities to then expand to the Bronx and the rest of the city more generally.
Hi, folks. So I'm just going to shift a little bit and talk about domestic violence homicides, so including both intimate partner and family homicides. And so the homicides here are for last year, 2022, and across the city there were 71 domestic violence homicides. And if you look at the top line, that's all domestic homicides. And if you look at the column headers, that indicates by borough. And you'll see in the Bronx last year there were 18 domestic violence homicides, and if you go down 2 lines, the first subgroup would be intimate partner violence, which there were 11 homicides, and the second subgroup would be family, and there were 7 homicides. And again, that's just last year, and that's out of 71. And now I'm going to drill down a little further, and we're just going to look at intimate partner homicides for the last 6 years, 2016 to 2022. And if you look, across the city, the highest number of homicides, intimate partner homicides, was in Community District in the Bronx 3 and 6. And that includes Claremont, Croatia Park, sorry about that, Melrose, Morrisana, Bathgate, Belmont, East Tremont, and West Farms. And that's 14 homicides. So that's pretty high. And that's followed by Bronx 9, which Julie mentioned before, also had the second highest victimizations rate, followed by Manhattan 12, Bronx 4, Manhattan 10, and Queens 12. And if you drill down a little further, again, we said there were 14 homicides for this period, and now we can look a little bit more at the sex of the victim, the race, ethnicity, and the age ranges. And so of those 14 victims, 9, the majority, were females, and 5 were males. And if you look at the race and ethnicity, the majority were Hispanic, and followed where there were 8 homicides, and Black people where there were 6 homicides. And if you look across the years on the right-hand side, you'll see they're somewhat spread throughout, but the highest number are in what I'm going to call young people, because I'm older than that, so now that's young to me, of 18 to 29 years, and there were 5 people, followed by 50 to 59, there were 4 people, 30 to 39, there were 3 people, and 40 to 49, there was 1 person, and 60 to 69, there was 1 person as well. So that comprises the demographics of those 14 homicides across those 6 years that occurred in community districts 3 and 6. And so Julie Maritza and I are here to talk to you a little bit about this and raise awareness and share a little bit about what we're doing to really start a conversation and really spread awareness. So we've done some outreach to community, to the PSA 7. Julie spoke at a Dove meeting, and so we're here today to really start the conversation because you guys are really the grassroots. You are the Bronx, and so we're here to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to turn it over back to Julie.
Thank you. And then, so I'm just going to finish up really quickly, shifting to the sort of same pattern, or the same research that we did looking at the other family violence data. So other family violence is violence that occurs between individuals who are related by blood or marriage, such as like parents and children, siblings, grandparents, grandchildren. It's any sort of domestic violence that doesn't occur between, partners who have that intimate relationship. And so overall, New York City has a family violence felony assault victimization rate of about 4 incidents per 10,000 residents. And the rates are highest for Black women and also Native American, or American Indian, Alaskan Native men, and boys, because this section can include children as well, this data. And so this pattern is just slightly different than what we see in the IPV data. So again, looking at the proportional disparities, Black, Hispanic, and American Indian Alaskan residents were overrepresented, I guess, among the reported incidents of family violence felony assault in the city. And again, in the boroughs, the Bronx has the highest family violence felony assault rate of about 6 incidents per 10,000 residents, which is much lower than the IPV rate, which was about 14. So it's the highest, but it is still lower. And then looking more closely at the Bronx, you can again see that American Indian, Alaskan Native men have a much higher victimization rate than the other demographic populations in the borough. And some of this disparity can be explained by small sample sizes, just because there aren't that many domestic violence incidents against this population, and the population is not a huge proportion of residents in the Bronx. But it is still worth acknowledging and exploring this disparity, because it means that even though there is a smaller population of American Indian, Alaskan Native residents in the community, that those residents are still being disproportionately impacted by family violence. And so looking at the actual versus expected proportions, again, Black residents are overrepresented. And you can see what I was referring to a little bit with the small sample sizes on the far right. So the overall number of American Indian, Alaskan Native victims is pretty close to what, it is higher than what we would expect, but not like way higher, given the demographics of the Bronx. But when we did, sort of crunch the numbers and do the statistics, the number of male victims who are American Indian, Alaskan Native was significantly significant, meaning that something other than chance is sort of driving that disparity. And again, I just wanted to point out the sort of graph for all of the districts in the Bronx. 1 and 2 and 3 and 6 report sort of the highest victimization rates of family violence in the Bronx. And in Bronx 3 and 6, Asian Pacific Islander men and boys reported the highest rates of family violence compared to, or followed a little bit by Black women and girls. And again, this disparity in the Asian Pacific Islander men and boys can be explained somewhat by a small population or a small sample size, but again, it is still sort of a different pattern than we see elsewhere in the Bronx and elsewhere in New York City, and so it's sort of worth flagging and thinking about and considering how we can reach these populations a little differently. Okay, so basically what does all this mean? It means that intimate partner violence and family violence victimization show different patterns and thus require different solutions. So when we talk about intimate partner violence, the data seems to pretty clearly show that across the city, really no matter where you're looking, Black residents and particularly Black women are overrepresented among victims of intimate partner family violence. And so to us, that suggests that outreach, should be targeted at specific populations or specific demographics rather than necessarily areas where, Black residents constitute the majority, but trying to find Black residents everywhere throughout the borough. Whereas when we talk about family violence data, who is most at risk varies between boroughs and even with neighborhoods. And so in this particular area of violence, it's really important to sort of go back to your individual communities and try to understand, that what is happening in your community is not necessarily what's happening broadly. And so understanding what services are important and necessary for each unique neighborhood is important to help ensure that services are reaching the populations most in need in all of the individual areas where they're needed. And then I just wanted to show this slide one more time to highlight that the results of these analyses generally reflect the realities of structural oppression, which privileges certain identity groups, discriminating against others, and leaving them more vulnerable to harm. And so this data really doesn't say anything about the individual populations or necessarily, the data doesn't tell us why we are getting these rates, but other data, and what we know more generally is that it's a lot of the underlying structural forces that form the root causes of violence that lead to these racial and gender disparities in domestic violence rates. And so I've included some information and some resources about the services that our office provides for domestic violence survivors. In particular, I want to highlight our Family Justice Center, which are buildings located in all 5 boroughs. They are safe, caring environments that provide free, one-stop services to support survivors of domestic violence. They can help with safety planning, applying for public benefits and counseling, job training, legal help for orders of protection, custody, visitation, child support, connections to law enforcement and the DA's office, and childcare. And all of these services are located on one roof. And the Bronx Family Justice Center is right down the street. So it's right in this area. And then if you need to know where to go, it's actually in this building. Look at that. 2nd floor. So the Bronx Family Justice Center is in this building on the 2nd floor. And so this website, or this PowerPoint, will be made available to all of you, so you'll have access to these services and more resources. And if you have any questions or follow-ups, feel free to connect with us. We probably don't have time for questions right now, but we can stick around for a little bit afterwards if anyone has questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie and Kara from the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. I did note at the beginning of the presentation that we weren't going to take any questions, but these are gut-wrenching data and reports that I think it's necessary that we address. And so with that, I just want to be able to take 2 questions, starting with Rafael and Anthony, and if there's one more question, yes, again, because these are gut-wrenching data that, for the Bronx specifically, that we must address.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. Thank you for that. Very unfortunate, this presentation. We like to get nice presentations, but this is really unfortunate. My question is just, The homicide stats were a 6-year range in the timeline. What's the timeline for these stats that you just provided?
So these stats for the felony assault victimization rates are 2020 and 2021. So it's just a 2-year period. And then we should be updating it all with the 2022 data pretty soon.
Yeah, my thinking now is, 2020, we were on lockdown.
Right.
So these numbers could have been different in 2018, 2019. I would like to see, correct. Thank you, Madam Deputy. But that was my question. Thank you.
I think that's extremely important in terms of comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing we do on the NGBV website, we do produce annual reports that have some of this information in terms of like the number of DIR reports and in which communities and demographics of who is filing the DIR reports. I will say that the reason we sort of started with 2020, we got the DIR report form changed pretty recently to allow us to get more information from it. So some of this, some of the demographic breakdown and some of the information isn't available prior to 2020, which was why we started there. I'll also say that the number of DIR reports, because we did think, like, well, COVID happened in 2020, so what did that do to the numbers? And the numbers of DIR reports actually didn't change very much between like 2018, 2019, and 2020. It's always held reasonably, it varies a little bit, but it's sort of in the same range. And so because of that and because of the sort of extra information that we got from the new version of the DIR reports, that was why we decided to start in 2020. But there is information about domestic violence incidents throughout the city in older annual reports on our website.
Thank you. Anthony, but before we go to the question, I just want to acknowledge that the Bronx Borough President's DV Council, which is spearheaded by Dr. Nancy Keck, if anyone wants to connect with Nancy right after the board meeting to speak on some initiatives, and if you want to be a part of the council as well, Dr. Keck is here. Anthony, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. Just a quick question about the data. Do you also break the data down more granularly, talking about education, housing, and employment status of the individual? Because I think it tells more of a more broader, unfortunate picture of the situations. So that would be great if you could say that with the Borough President's office. And what programming, since this data is kind of aged because of has the office already has on the way that's going to be able to address these horrific statistics?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, can you repeat the first part of your question one more time?
Sure. So do you have more granular data that goes deeper?
Yes. Okay.
That talks about, first, are there the ones we talked about male and female incidences in the community boards, are there children involved in those households? Secondly, education, housing status, whether homeless shelters or other employment, how deep are you going in data in reference to this? And then secondly, what programming, since this is somewhat aged data, has your office is either have on the way or already in process to help to address these statistics?
Yeah, so those are great questions. For your first question about the whether or not we can dig deeper into other demographics of these victimization rates, unfortunately, we are sort of limited by the data that we're able to receive. The city, we've been asking to do sort of an in-depth prevalence study looking at in-depth, how many people are impacted by domestic violence and who is it happening to and in what areas. But as of now, we're limited to just the police department DIR forms, which don't collect that kind of information. We do have some information about age, and we have done some work looking at dividing it up by age. It's not presented in here. The family violence data does include children. The intimate partner violence data does not, because we assume that children, they can't consent to an intimate relationship, right? So any of that would be included, would just become family violence data. We do have some reports on our website that look at the areas of at the socioeconomic and education levels in general and poverty levels in specific areas, and then sort of note that in a lot of these areas where domestic violence rates are particularly high also tend to be high poverty areas, and areas where people have lower levels of education and things like that. But unfortunately, we don't have the data to sort of connect individuals to that information. We can really only look at correlations in the area until we're able to do a more thorough prevalence study throughout the city. And then really quick, I'll just switch to the end here because I skipped over it for time, but we do have a number of services to help prevent and help support survivors. So obviously we have our family justice centers, which provide services to anybody experiencing domestic violence who might need help, and we can provide them with any services and safety planning that they might need. We also run a program called Home Plus, which is sort of a program that allows survivors to stay safely in their homes. They can receive a personal pendant alarm system as well as locksmith services to help them remain in their homes but receive help or change locks on their doors or replace windows, broken doors, things like that as needed. We do run a program called Respect and Responsibility, which is a free, non-mandated citywide demonstration initiative for adults who have caused harm or have been abusive in their relationships. And the ideas here are that domestic violence won't fully stop until people stop perpetrating it. So if we can reach the people who are causing the harm and use trauma-informed healing, reflection, and accountability practices, we can reduce domestic violence by cutting it off at the source. And then we've also teamed up recently with Norton LifeLock to provide survivors with comprehensive cybersecurity for their cell phones and computers, to permit survivors to access technology devices and safely and provide security protection against spyware and malware and viruses. And we're always trying to develop new programming, and part of the reason that we're here is to connect with the communities to learn what it is that you need and your community needs, and how we, as the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence, can help support you in your neighborhoods on the ground.
Thank you so much, and I just want to flag, and I want to add to Anthony's question and just note for the mayor's office that we will be requesting a follow-up, because I think that, again, given the inequities and the severe disproportionate data that this report amplifies, there needs to be a larger conversation. But one of the things that I wanted to add to Anthony's question is when the report goes over the resources, I want to see what other resources are being delivered in the outer boroughs and the other boroughs in comparison to the Bronx, because clearly there's an inequity issue, and yes, there are services, and we want to thank the DA's office and Bronx Family Justice Center for providing these resources. But if the data continues to historically tell us that there's an issue in the Bronx, there needs to be more services and more intention to focus services right here in our borough. So once again, I want to thank the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence for your presentation. We will definitely ask you back again, because this conversation cannot be limited to the presentation and to questions. It has to be ongoing, and as you can tell, the entire board is dedicated to addressing these inequities in our borough. So thank you so much. And again, apologies for the limited time that we've had this morning. We welcome you back.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're really excited for the opportunity to be here and to work with you. We've seen the same, the data speaks really clearly.
Yes.
So we knew that we needed to connect with you, and we're really excited that you're so open and welcoming to us.
Absolutely. And for the folks that are still here, I know it is 12:07, but we have a very, very important announcement from the Sanitation Foundation. Many of you are familiar with this presentation and this initiative, and we just want to let you know that we're excited to welcome this initiative back. Once again, thank you so much to the mayor's office for your ability to be here this morning.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jahadi James. I am a youth mentor, and I am the outreach manager for the Sanitation Foundation. The Sanitation Foundation is the official nonprofit of the Department of Sanitation. So we do a lot of outreach with the community. We're hands-on. We do a lot of educational programs based on recycling and composting and how to put out your garbage correctly. So we're the hands-on folks that speak with the community residents and get information from the community and deliver that to the Department of Sanitation. And for the last 3 years, we've been hosting our summer cleanup series right here in the Bronx. We do a number of cleanups all over the city. We work with council members all over the city, but in the summertime, we focus on the Bronx. Unfortunately, the Bronx, from a lot of our cleanups, we get the most trash from the Bronx. Average cleanup in the Bronx will get us maybe like 1,500 pounds of trash. You could imagine in 2 hours, that's a lot of trash in comparison to somewhere in Midtown, where in that same time frame, we'll get like 150 pounds of trash, right? So the disparity is very noticeable in the Bronx. So this is our 3rd year doing the cleanup series in the Bronx, and every year it's a great celebration because we don't only look at the cleanup as just cleaning up the neighborhood. It's a community building opportunity as well, so we encourage all residents to come out. We thank the borough president who I met last summer at one of the cleanups. She got down and dirty with us to clean up the streets. So, we thank everybody that comes out as volunteers. So this summer is very special because if you don't know, this is the 50th anniversary of hip hop, which started in the Bronx. We could give a round of applause for that. Bring the energy up a little bit. All right. Bronx, you guys are the epicenter of hip hop culture. So along with the cleanup this summer, we're not only cleaning up the neighborhoods, we're also adding a hip hop component to each cleanup. As you can see there, the different dates, we're going from the 21st to the 12th. We have 6 different cleanups lined up in neighborhoods throughout the Bronx. And each cleanup, starts at 10, ends at 12. We average about 125 volunteers per cleanup, so this is a large amount of people that come out and clean up. They're incentivized because the partners that we have for the cleanups are Amazon and the New York Yankees. So one of the cool things about the cleanups is that everybody that comes to the cleanup, they receive a voucher for 2 Yankee tickets. So that's a great incentive for a lot of people to come up and help clean up. And out of the 6 cleanups, the group or the location that collects the most trash, when we tally it all up at the end, that location, the volunteers that volunteered at that specific location, they will receive VIP Yankee tickets to box seats at a special Yankees game. So it's a really great community. You could give a round of applause for that too. Shout out the Yankees. That's our home team. And so it's a great opportunity for the community to get involved, for all of the residents from from children to the elders to come together. It's a great community building opportunity, and we're just looking for as much support with from you guys for the foundation. Like I said, each cleanup just starts out with all the volunteers gathering, and then we walk the route. We are the hip hop component for this year. We have each cleanup kind of highlighting all the elements of hip-hop. If you don't know, there are 4 different elements of hip-hop: rapping, breakdancing, beatboxing, and graffiti. We're not going to call graffiti, we call it visual art, right? So we're not, obviously we're the Department of Sanitation. We're not pro-graffiti, we are pro-visual art, right? So we can, so at each cleanup, we will highlight one of those elements. For example, in Mott Haven, we're also trying to, not trying, but we are coordinating with local businesses that have hip-hop connections. So in Mott Haven, we're speaking with Up NYC, which is Fat Joe's store. He's a Bronx resident, and he has a sneaker store in Mott Haven, so we'll be partnering with him, hopefully, to have his store as the starting point and ending point to the cleanup. So the cleanup starts at the store, we walk a route, we come back around, and we end in front of the business, and there will be some sort of activation there where we have local artists and local people from the community that will speak about cleaning up, and also, local hip-hop artists that will be able to present their creativity. And that happens at each cleanup in Soundview. We're going to be at Classens Point Library. We have a notable hip-hop author and producer, Amadeus, that's supposed to come and speak about his book. So yeah, we're just basically looking for any support that we can get from the Bronx Borough President's Office, And things such as radio, exposure, any other businesses that we can communicate with to make this a bigger celebration. And yeah, that's pretty much it in general. It's a fun event, and I encourage everyone, whether it is these cleanups or something in your neighborhood, Sanitation Foundation is here to support you. So if you are on your block and you say, hey, this block is dirty, personally, and I believe the Sanitation Foundation agrees with me, that one of the biggest issues in the city right now is the sanitation, is the trash on the streets. It's something that we all deal with every day. Cleanliness goes hand in hand with safety. So if we want a safe community and safe New York City, we need a clean New York City. So these initiatives are very important, and I just appreciate the time.
My mic is not on, but the Bronx Borough President's Office, we do have the flyers. We're so happy to partner up once again with the Sanitation Foundation. We will share them with you all. The Sanitation Foundation created a social media toolkit that's shareable. I think it's a PDF, it's a JPEG. There are different versions of it, so we will make sure to share with the entire board. We have time for one question.
You answered it.
Oh, okay, there we go. Rafael, yes.
I have a question for you that I wanted to bring up around the overall structure of our meetings.
Oh, not related to sanitation? Okay, can we wrap really quick with the foundation?
Sure, yep.
Any questions for the foundation? Okay, thank you so much, Jahari. Thank you for your energy, and I will be showing up to one of these. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much. With that, Rafael, before we go to announcements.
Hi, yes. So I just wanted to ask about borough cabinet meetings. Section 2706 of the city charter requires us to hold cabinet meetings where we hold the agencies accountable for the delivery of city services. Every other borough in New York City has a separate cabinet and borough meeting so that we can meet with agencies and ask them about the deliverables of their required functions, right? George was asking questions earlier about fines and citations and code enforcement. And I don't believe that the Bronx is so much better at service delivery that we don't need to do this. And every other borough is doing this. So I ask that the Bronx begin to hold cabinet meetings again, where we bring agencies before us to speak about their core functions and are they meeting deliverables on their core functions. Code enforcement, responding to 301 complaints, et cetera, because I think this is a thing we really need to address. For DMs right now as a whole, we're preparing for our budget consultations with the boroughs. We have serious concerns with how the agencies are operating. They're not meeting their deliverables, even their own stated deliverables. And it's not enough for us to do it once a year. We really ask that you do it every month as required by the city charter.
Great. And just to clarify, we are not in violation of the city charter mandate. This is a carryover from the previous administration that was voted upon by both entities. And so given that we were also impacted by a global pandemic that forced us to go remote, we just carry that same structure over. However, we're very much open to that feedback. And if that is something that everyone is in agreement with, we will carry that feedback back, discuss internally, and report back. So thank you so much for sharing and amplifying that concern. Couldn't agree more. Comments? George?
A quick aside, since we're back in person now, like this is official, we're not getting any more extensions.
We tried.
I come all the way from Co-op City, so shout out to Simone for shouting us out earlier. But to make it easier, I'm a reverse commute. Coming down this way is not easy for a lot of people, whether you're commuting or not. There's no traffic going to my building. We've done budget consultations previously in my building. We have great space. We have access for all of this stuff. So I offer my office as a place for future meetings. I will not pay for coffee or food. But,
Thank you so much.
I do offer our space because I think might be a little more accessible for some folks to get there rather than over here. No offense to people who live down here in the
Yeah, you're always welcome to George.
Thank you so much, George, for that. And you know, in the beginning, I didn't mention this, but we fought and advocated very, very strongly and worked with the mayor's office to please extend this to the end of the month again to allow us to prepare for this. So we do ask for some grace as we dealt with it in real time through advocacy and determination to ensure that this was a comfortable comeback for in person, thus the coffee and the bagels.
So for borough services, we do district service cabinets.
Yes.
They're not, like, we have cameras here, this is required. I don't know if it needs to be this needs to be a public meeting.
Yes.
District service cabinets, does it need to be?
We don't have to, right? Yeah.
More, it might be a better situation for us because agencies might be a little more willing to.
Right. And again, open to this feedback. We can have side conversations. We can, again, we're very much open. This is a new administration. We carried it over. We were impacted by the pandemic. So we are more than open to having this conversation and addressing how we can better host these meetings so that they are intentional and address the real issues that we have in our community and our borough-wide. So open, very much open to that. With that, we have some really quick announcements. I'll pass it over to Tom, our senior advisor, regarding July's Borough Board.
Good afternoon, everyone. For the July Borough Board meeting, as you all know, there is a ULURP that you all are considering over these last month or so. The Borough Board will be voting on that ULURP at its next meeting. The next meeting is July 13th. It's moved up from its normal date. It is Thursday, July 13th, right here in this room. Your chairpersons or a officer of your board who is authorized to vote on behalf of the board needs to be here in order to vote. I do know that several boards have chosen not to vote on these items, which may present us with an issue as we move forward with the actual vote. We will be in touch with your offices to determine if you've made that, if you've scheduled or if you've already voted. We'll be in touch with the council members to see if they will be able to vote on that day as well, since it is an item that eventually will make it to the full city council and the land use committee. So just as an FYI, July 13th, 10 a.m. here in this room, and we will determine if that would be a joint meeting similar to this one, or if it will just be a borough board meeting, since that is, at this point, the item that is on the agenda for a vote. Laura had a question.
We'll vote on this item in September.
Oh.
And city planning is coming back. I just want to
The
throw that out.
timelines.
We had a presentation in June, but there were many, many questions, and we decided they want to come back with those answers, we sent those questions. But just throwing that out, I know now that it's going to be voted on in September.
Can we get a count on how many?
Yeah, but won't that be a time when when the city council or the city planning commission would have already voted on it by September? I mean, we can check the calendar, but our recommendation from the borough president's office is actually due on June 30th. They've given us a bit of an extension to the date that we've chosen for the borough board because there are 7 boards or 6 boards meeting next week. So half of the boards would not have had the opportunity to vote on this, which is why we've moved it to the 13th. So everybody does have that opportunity. But I think once our 30 days is up, which is the 13th, which is the 30th, it technically will start the 45-day clock on the City Planning Commission, which would bring you to the middle of August, and the city council then has 60 days after that time frame. So you are talking about September, October for the city council, but your recommendation won't be part of the City Planning Commission record.
One information, I spoke with them,
city planning, and they said as long as we could vote up until the day that the commission votes, up until that day.
But the borough board is voting on a specific
know.
day.
Yeah. But they
Because
did
our
say,
recommendation is due
right,
on the date of it.
but they said as far as community boards.
City planning told us we could vote in September, so I'm confused.
As long as it's.
And we have a different mandate.
Before they vote. It could be that day or
Because this
before.
is a citywide text amendment. It's
Correct.
not
I mean, this is a citywide, but in terms of the timeframes that we have to deal with, our recommendation has to be in on by the 30th. Technically, the same day as the borough board recommendation. So while that may be accurate, you won't be able to vote at borough board.
So the chairperson won't be able to vote.
Yeah, I also want to thank the Borough Board for all their presentations. This will be my last meeting at the Borough Board. Yes, there is a very, very long tradition of chairs serving 3 years, which I am upholding, and I'm at the end of my 3rd year, but this has been very instructional. I'll still be active on Community Board 8, and I just want to thank you for all the information over the past 2 years. I've really listened to it.
Madam Chair, it has been a pleasure and an honor to serve with you. Thank you so much for your years of service, and I know that they will continue. You are the chair of my community board, and with your leadership, I've seen tremendous change in my district. So I am personally thankful for you, and I know that your colleagues in government are as well. So thank you so much for serving. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. And final announcement, our Director of Community Boards, Kiara Cannon, has a quick announcement on Code of Conduct.
First, Laura, congratulations on completing your 3 years. It was great working with you. First, I want to mention, as just a reminder, we have sent out a code of conduct to all board members. It is required that they sign it, agree to it, and abide by it. We'll be following up in the next few weeks with those who have not, and I will be utilizing your offices to do so. I am working on a demographic report for 2022. It's due at the end of the month, so I've also been in touch with your board members. The reappointments have already filled out that demographic piece on their reappointment application, but it's really for the even year folks. We want to make sure that the demographics match. So that's important. We're putting together a community board appreciation event. More details to come on that, and we'd like for all of you and your board members to attend. And same with an orientation. We'll be putting that together for the class of new board members, and a refresher course for current members now that we're going back in person. It's, a lot of the feedback we got from interviewing board members was that they wanted a refresher course. So that is feedback we have taken and we will be doing. So thank you, everyone.
And with that, I promise these are the last 2 announcements. I just want to share some events that are stemming from the Bronx Borough President's Office. Tonight, we have our Caribbean Heritage Month celebration. It's going to take place over at East Gun Hill Road, Code Red Restaurant, if you are familiar with it, 1320 East Gun Hill Road. We have flyers outside, doors open at 5:30, and the program starts at 6 p.m. We are celebrating and honoring Caribbean residents that have truly made a change here in our borough. Also, Thursday, June 29th, we have our annual fireworks celebration over at Orchard Beach. We're going to start at 5 p.m. And with that, I want to once again thank our presenters that we had today. We had greetings from the borough president that was unexpected but very much welcome. But we thank you so much for your patience. We thank you for your presentation. And we thank you for your willingness to follow up with the questions and concerns that were addressed here today. And with that, it is a pleasure to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for being here, being present, and showing up. We truly appreciate it. Take care and have a blessed Thursday.